Hello everyone and welcome to Books in the World. Books in the World, a production of the Cape Cod Writers Center in its 56th year, and Books in the World is in its 40th year, and I just found that out, and then a few days ago went to the award ceremony for the Mercy Otis Warren Woman of the Year Award, who was Nancy Vile Shoemaker. And as I listened to stories about Mercy and Nancy and thought about Cape Cod, I said, it's time we had Nancy talk about Mercy on Books in the World, because there are a couple of connections between the Cape Cod Writers Center,
yes,
the Mercy Otis Warren Award, and Books in the World. But welcome and congratulations.
Thank you, Madeline.
Nancy,
nice to be here.
It's nice to have you. You and I have known each other for a couple of years, and
Yes.
I have to say that I'm so impressed and delighted to hear about all your exploits in preserving local history, for one thing. That's something that I know is dear to your heart, and I'm not sure when they pick the Mercy Otis Warren Award winner where they focus, because your experience is so, not only your experience, but your contributions are varied. And
well, I know that they choose someone for community involvement, not necessarily for an interest in history, but I was honored, humbled, surprised, and it was a nice moment in my life.
I would think.
Yeah.
I would think. How was the 4th of July parade?
Actually, I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. You drive along. I was in a 1934 Ford Roadster, and everyone's waving and smiling at you, so it's like, it was sort of pleasant.
Well, just before we really delve into this subject, I wanted to quote from this was the program for the Mercy Otis Woman of the Year Award, where the person who nominated you said that you have qualities that are strikingly similar to Mercy Otis Warren and your early West Barnstable compatriot. And she said, as historians, playwrights, and publishers, they have used their literary talents and skills to promote awareness of contemporary and historical issues, and by example, advocate for activism on current issues. So that's
they may overspeak, but,
mantle.
But I was proud to be from West Barnstable, as Mercy was born in West Barnstable in 1728. And I live only about a mile and a half down from where her house once stood. It's no longer there.
Yeah, so you were inspired by her.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, I picked up Nancy Rubin Stewart's biography of Mercy Otis Warren a few days ago. And one of the things she says very early in her preface is that she was not very well known, Mercy. And as I spent this time preparing to talk to you and thinking about it, I'm thinking, wow, what a shame. We should do
Truly.
more to promote her name and her.
And I'm gratified that a lot of Cape Codders and young people are getting to know what her role was in the American Revolution and in the writing of the Bill of Rights. I mean, back in, I started working with Marion Vullimere, who was the first recipient of the award, with the Barnstable's 350th anniversary booklet. And that was the first time I heard of Mercy, and that's 1989, 88, 89.
Wow.
And then there was another woman from New Jersey who came up, and she really enlightened all of us at Tales of Cape Cod of her authorship, her suggestions of what was lacking in the Constitution that would eventually become the Bill of Rights.
Yeah. So she lived on the Cape. She was not educated formally, but educated by her brother's tutors.
Yes, which was actually a form of formal education at the time.
Okay.
She did get a classic education, which was unheard of.
Unheard of.
In New England and probably all the colonies at that time. And she might be the first somewhat formally, classically educated woman on Cape Cod. She was a natural student. Her older brother, James, who she called Jemmy, would go to classes at Reverend Russell, which was their uncle, And it was the form of education that was available at the time, that the minister in the area would educate chosen young men to continue on to become lawyers, magistrates, businessmen.
So one of the points that is made about her is perhaps she is not as well known because in the 18th century they did not promote women in any way.
No. She had to write,
especially as scholars.
yeah,
You know, she wasn't.
yeah. She had to
considered.
write her first few articles that went into the Boston papers, and she wrote plays and poems, and they were all under a pseudonym.
They
But,
were under a pseudonym.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. But her influence on the colonial era, the uprisings, she promoted the idea that the colonists should not accept what was going on with Britain.
Particularly, her brother, John Adams, has said that he started the spark of the American Revolution. Her
James
brother,
Otis.
James, the oldest brother.
Right.
And he particularly wrote and had a 4.5-hour speech, which he gave at the State House up in Boston in February of 1861, about the writs of assistance, which was what's the word I want to use? Really what we would think is illegal search warrants. Like British soldiers could go into your home, make sure you were complying with the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, the Molasses Act, and he was really fighting against that. So that's 1761. 1769, he has a blow to the head by a British soldier up in Boston, and he is never the same again. And it's really her brother's accident and diminished intelligence or ability to get his thoughts out that made her join the American Revolution, the idea of revolting against King George III.
And she was an advisor to both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson at different times.
Yes,
and
yes,
I
she
found
was.
that fascinating. They would rely on her, just the way a president today would have advisors on various different subjects.
That started when she married James Warren, who lived in Plymouth. So she moved up to Plymouth in 1754. And so move all my dates back 100 years, sorry. She was often the person behind the scenes with a lot of the planning of the revolution in her husband's home. And she was more than a wife just serving beer and tea. She was there giving her advice, and they respected her.
Right. Her dates are 1728 to 1814, so we'll set that in our minds. And she was, I think, 86 or so when she died. But another fascinating thing that she wrote, that after the American Revolution, she wrote a 3-volume history of the American Revolution.
Yes, 1,200 pages worth. Yeah.
Have you seen this publication?
I have. It's at the Sturgis Library.
It is.
All 3 volumes are there.
Is it readable?
It's
just to a
very
modern reader.
different. No, to a modern reader, it's not easy. And I have only read
chore.
snippets. I have not read it from cover to cover.
The reason I ask is that a few weeks ago I had the honor to interview Nathaniel Philbrick, and he mentions someone who wrote sort of the real history of the American Revolution, who was not Mercy Otis Warren, it was somebody else, but apparently that didn't survive. So this sort of glorious history wasn't really the glorious history. I mean, I would imagine that Mercy Otis Warren's history is more realistic than what we have come to know.
Most definitely. And there were many things that she did not agree with. And a lot of what she wrote and portrayed the Adams family as in her 3-volume history did not go over very well with the Adams, and there was a falling out between them for a while.
Really? Including Abigail?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe someone should set about reading this and writing a summary or a reinterpretation for those
I'm sure Nancy Rubin Stewart has probably read all of it, and we have 2 or 3 other authors that have really been intense scholars of Mercy Otis Warren's life.
So if any listeners would like to know more, there are sources, including the ones that we've mentioned. The Mercy Otis Warren Committee was started in 2002, I
Right.
believe.
Yes.
And as I was reading about this wonderful woman, I was thinking there should be Mercy Otis Warren Society nationally, but apparently there isn't.
Not yet.
No.
No.
But she is in the National Women's Hall of Fame in
mhm.
Seneca Falls. Have you been there?
I haven't.
I have.
haven't.
It's
Oh, wow,
wonderful.
great,
It's
great.
wonderful. Very inspiring, and it's a place we should all be
Mhm.
going to. And there are probably, I don't know, maybe 500 women who are in this
And she
roster.
certainly deserves a
She
place.
deserves it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So when you met Marion Volumir, I don't know, our listeners probably don't all know that she is the founder of the Cape Cod Writers
Yes.
Center.
And she was the
and
first
Books in
person
the
to win
World.
the Mercy
And-
Otis Warren Award.
Yeah.
And she wrote 26 or 27 books, a lot of them about Cape Cod. An incredible woman. And I was, as I said, lucky enough to work with her on the book for the 350th anniversary. And she taught me a lot. My history
So,
mother.
Your history.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. So you are a publisher. When you say you worked with her, did you work with her on her books?
I worked with her only on that one book.
Okay.
And I got my interest in books from being a printer's daughter. I was running presses from the time I was 14, proofreading when I was 14 or 15 with my mother. The first book that I proofread with her was the New Alchemy Institute's journals. We printed the first 5 books of theirs. It was a fascinating thing to be a printer's daughter and have artists, poets, photographers, historians coming into our shop. Every day I'd come home from school and there would be some other fascinating person that wanted to get their message across with books or pamphlets or brochures. So it was a nice childhood.
Yeah, well, even today you say you feel somewhat like a midwife to creative people.
Yeah, I describe it that people come in pregnant with their book. Like this is a cookbook by Tim McNulty up in Provincetown. And they come in with their ideas and with their pictures or graphics. And then I make it come together and hopefully display it so it's readable and enticing to people.
So you are really an editor at that point.
Also, yes,
You
yeah,
are
yeah,
creating
yeah.
books with someone who has an idea
yeah.
for a book. And in some cases you do some writing.
Oh, I do when
Yeah.
they want me to,
When
But even things like the shape of a book. And of course the cover is always something that's so important to get people to start looking. And this book is one I did fairly recently, a children's book with Anne LeClaire and Kim Rodriguez. And that again is to lure people in. I have a little note in there. But placement of the pictures and the type used and there's so many things that can make a reader go, I want to read this,
Yeah.
or, well,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
not. And I hope visually I help the author get their message across.
Well, that's good to know. I'm not sure if there's another press on the Cape that can do that for people.
Oh, there probably
May-
is.
Yeah.
No, it probably is.
You're very modest, I know, but when I see the output here, and you've been very nice, introduced me to quite a few people. Kim Rodriguez, Gil Newton.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a Gil book here
There's
somewhere, and I'm
Gil-
doing his 6th book with him right now on
Marine
seaweed.
Habitats, we had him here
Yeah.
on Books in the World.
Mm-hmm.
Are you the Barnstable Land Trust publisher, so to
No,
speak?
no. He
Okay.
had, what I prefer to do is not be the publisher,
Okay.
have people self-publish, or in this case, Gil wanted to give credit to Barnstable Land Trust to raise some money for them. But I prefer that they be the publisher, the official publisher. I help them get the word out. I help them with a little marketing, but it's mainly their book.
And you are the West Barnstable Press,
Right.
correct?
Right.
And do you have a website? Or?
WestBarnstablePress.com.
Okay.
Pretty easy to remember.
Pretty easy to remember. Circling back around to Mercy Otis Warren and the award, you gave a lovely speech that night, and I wanted to ask you to talk about it again.
Well, as I thought about what I would talk about after receiving this beautiful award. I thought I didn't want to talk about myself. I wanted to talk about Mercy, and I did describe a few unusual facts about her, interesting facts about her, but also that the fact that she was a writer, and Nancy even says in here, Muse of the American Revolution, the secret pen of Mercy Otis Warren. And the fact that she wrote means we now have a history of the American Revolution. She wrote hundreds of letters to people like Martha Washington and Abigail Adams and John Adams. These are all things that we now, more than 200 years later, can look back at and learn from. And if she hadn't written, put pen to paper, we'd be missing so much. So that night, my message to people was, go home and write. Doesn't matter if it's something only you are going to read 5 months later. I read something I wrote. It was what I did a full day in 2012 in the last 2 weeks. I read this in the middle of the night, you know, waking up and thinking, what am I going to read? And it was charming to me, and it only had to be to me. And yet it could be a book that will be interesting to others, and again, it could be something that in the year 2220, a historian's going to look back on and go, oh, I'm glad they wrote that down.
Yeah,
So,
it was an interesting thought. It almost made me go home and write.
Good.
Almost.
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 All right.
About meeting you.
Yeah.
And meeting you actually brought some thoughts to mind about local history of other people I have known who have been truly dedicated to preserving this building or that piece of land, and meeting at the historical societies. And if it wasn't for those people, how many buildings would have been demolished?
Oh,
and
yes.
so thoughts about local historians
yeah.
is a topic.
We
that,
have well, actually, there's a couple of books on, I do mostly tend to do history books, but this one is all about the civil rights movement, and it was written by a couple from Harwichport.
Yeah.
And something that I think is invaluable. I think a home should have that book in there. And this is a book about the history of a peninsula that's off on the northern part of Plymouth Harbor. And fascinating about life-saving.
Right.
Again, if this gentleman hadn't written this down, Dick Bunasar, the words,
Yeah.
many of them, and certainly the pictures, would be
Yeah.
possibly gone forever. So.
I was happy enough to have Jim Visbeck from the bookstore in Catuit at the Pink House, and he is collecting all books written about Cape Cod for sale. I mean, he buys them. And he had this point, in a way, it reminded me of something you said. It's like, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? And where will you buy these books? So anyway, the dedication is really, really wonderful. But as a midwife to authors, you also teach writing. Tell us about your course.
I run a writers group through the Academy for Lifelong Learning, which is out of Cape Cod Community College. And it's inspiring because when I write history, I write facts, I edit people's words, but some of them come up with the most outrageous historical fiction or completely fiction out there. And I admire the human mind for coming up with these incredible things. So writing is just fun. It's fun for you and possibly others, but I can't say how much.
So how do you encourage people? What is it that you feel that you bring to those classes?
Oh, in the class, constructive criticism that might help them open another door. It's a joint effort. There's no one real leader. We all encourage each other, suggest things. There's 2 or 3 of us who are grammar freaks. We might say, you know, that's a dangling, modifying phrase, or something like that. But it's the energy of, I call it a writing reading, because you as the author learn something as you're reading it out loud, and listening class, because we certainly all learn a lot by listening too.
Yeah.
So.
How many people are usually in the class?
We can have as many as 16,
Wow.
and that gets a little
It's
large,
hard,
but
yeah.
people enjoy being in the class.
So when we were at the Mercy Otis Warren Award night. It was at the West Barnstable, the
The
Barnstable,
old colonial courthouse.
the old colonial courthouse.
And the old colonial courthouse was built, we think, in the mid 1760s. We were giving a date of 1772 at one point. And this is another point. History is always in the making.
Okay.
We're always learning a little more, so it's not something static like we thought when we were in high school reading dates in textbooks.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's everybody else's lives and the good things and the bad things that they've done. But so the old colonial courthouse was the court of the King of England, King George III at that time. And Mercy's father was Colonel James Otis, and he presided over the court. And
In that very building?
Yes.
You
Yes.
certainly are bringing this to
Yeah.
life.
And it was a court of common pleas.
Yeah.
So you stole my pig, and I went there and got my own lawyer, or, you know, someone who would defend me, or sometimes just I would defend myself and say, I want Madeline to give back my pig. And Colonel James Otis would do that. And he was a lawyer and a judge, and he never went to college. And so he made sure James, his son, James Otis Jr., would go, and he went to Harvard, and he met James Warren, and that's how Mercy met James Warren.
And in that building today, there's a number of events. What is Tales of Cape Cod?
Tales of Cape Cod was started in 1949 by Louis Cataldo and Marjorie Worrell. And they started it by having interviews of people on Cape Cod with reel-to-reel tapes. Remember, way back before cassettes even.
Yeah.
And some of them have been digitized, and they're at Sturgis Library, and I think they're also at the Nickerson Room at Cape Cod Community College. They're not easy to decipher because they're pretty distorted, but Tales of Cape Cod has been doing oral histories for a long time, and I was involved in the late 80s through the 90s into 2000, doing over 100 television shows for cable access. And we have all of those
Where
digitized.
are they? Were they in,
Again, Sturgis Library has them. It could be that they have some here in your studio. They certainly did at one time.
And these are interviews with local people?
Yes,
Yeah.
local authors, politicians. There was two or three people. I know one of them was Reverend Kenneth Warren, who was the minister at the Unitarian Church in Barnstable Village. And they talked about the reverse freedom riders. And people have forgotten about that. That was something that happened in the early 1960s when John Kennedy was president. And buses were filled with black people and sent up here to embarrass the president. And they thought they would be treated poorly. And this group of people made sure they were welcomed, gave them homes and jobs, and you know, ended up being a positive thing. But those are good stories to learn by and to continue to learn by.
Something I've never heard of.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Sounds like, I was just thinking about Mercy Otis Warren again, propaganda plays. I mean, she had some, when you were talking about the Freedom Riders, I'm thinking now there's some good propaganda.
Yeah, which backfired on them. But yeah, Mercy and her family were very much against Governor Thomas Hutchinson. He was a loyalist. He was for the King of England. And Mercy's father, her husband, and her brother had been passed over for jobs that she felt rightfully should have been theirs. And Thomas Hutchinson got them. So she wrote some pretty vindictive, the Adulator, the group plays, satires against Thomas Hutchinson. And again, at first written by just an anonymous author.
So Nancy Rubin Stewart calls her possibly the first female nonfiction writer and the first female satirist.
Yes, yeah, I think that's true.
Really quite the pen. Yeah, she was quite good. So of all your activities, Nancy, where do you want to focus your next few years? What ambitions do you have for life? That's a big question.
I love what I do. I love my customers, clients who come in, whether it's books or newsletters for conservation groups. I love the mission of the people I work with. So I hope I do this as long as I can.
Where is the press?
I have a shop in Harwich, but I'm working now out of my home office in West Barnstable.
Different from the
Yeah.
old days.
I don't run presses
Don't run
anymore.
presses
You know, I was the first woman to be qualified in the Commonwealth as a press room teacher. And I worked at Cape Cod Tech in Harwich for 12 years. And that was enough. At this stage in life, I don't need to be carrying big skids of paper and working with solvents. And the printing industry has changed so much.
Yeah.
That's another whole subject of letterpress printing, lithography, going to offset printing, and now digital printing. And it's awkward at first for people who have been in the industry to make those adjustments, but it's all in all been a good thing.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
the editing process is
Yeah.
so much easier. The communication of
Oh, yes.
manuscripts
Yeah,
and
yeah.
finished and works in progress.
And how we can wake up at 3 in the morning and think, what was this, what was that? You go on the internet and there's so much information there
yeah,
for you.
it
to
makes life
get
very
into, look
easy. I
into.
was a librarian, as you know,
Yes,
and
yeah.
the whole subject of
Yeah.
reference books has gone away in a
Yeah.
way. I think
But
that's
don't
kinda
forget
sad.
books.
Don't forget.
We love books too. There's still something about flipping the page and going, now wait a minute, back on page 8, you know.
Yeah.
So they have their value.
Well, we're just about out of time, and I just want to say it's been a pleasure getting to know you and through you to learn more about Mercy Otis Warren and a lot of other subjects about what goes on in Cape Cod. I was surprised. I don't know too many people who lived on Cape Cod most of their lives, you know, and you
I
are one
actually
of them. Or
moved
all
here from New York
New York, but you were
when I was 10, 1960. Now you know how old I am. And boy, has the Cape changed.
for the better
Both,
or
both, yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure there's something about the rural quality of things that
Oh yeah, yeah.
is missed
When we
by-
moved up here, you picked up a phone and you said, "I want this number, 3 numbers," and this operator would take the cords and line it up to the right person. That's
well, it
that's
was
a while ago.
another time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. Enjoy everything you do, and thank you for being the
Thank
local
you. It's been
printer,
fun.
publisher, muse of our local historical
Well.
societies. Member of how many boards?
I think 8.
8, including
Yeah.
we haven't mentioned the Coast Guard Museum.
Yeah.
And thank you all for listening, and come back often for Books in the World, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, Nancy.